When you travel through Iceland, the barren landscape often stretches as far as the eye can see. Trees are a rare sight. After the Vikings arrived, a slow process of deforestation started in the places where people had settled down. The Vikings came to Iceland the latter part of the 9th century, and we can say that the Icelanders' human-made history began at that time. I was in Iceland together with one of my sons. The Vikings came to a quite unwelcoming island. Even though the landscape was green and the nature magnificent, it was barren, and there were neither elk nor other large animals to be hunted. Along the eastern coast, the sea fog lay thick like smoke under the ceiling in the longhouses. The trees in Iceland were never well suited for building houses, and once most of the forest was gone, people lacked firewood as well. Turf was the solution. Many places had plenty of it. The turf house you see here is located on the Seydisfjörður farm. It is situated on the Egilsstaðir, a plateau 500 meters above sea level. When I visited Seydisfjörður, I met the German family. It was their first visit to Iceland. They were fascinated by the nature, and they thought there were hardly any people in Iceland. They might be right. Iceland has only 380,000 inhabitants. For comparison, there are almost 500,000 sheep. People lived in turf houses at Seydisfjörður from 1843 to 1943. The house you can enter now is a faithful replica built in 1992. In the museum in Egilsstaðir there is a turf house where people lived until 1964. The turf house at Seydisfjörður is privately owned, unlike most other turf houses which are owned by the National Museum of Iceland. In the summer the owners live in another turf house, and they have converted the sheep barn into a cafe and meeting room that can be rented. Here you can also buy handicrafts. Let's go inside the turf house. Turf was used instead of firewood, even though the Icelandic turf contains a lot of volcanic ash. Even so, people had to take fire hazard seriously. The kitchen is of the simple kind. I was also inside the turf house of the family, and their kitchen was much more modern. During winter time, the weather is often cold in Iceland. In turf houses, the animals often stood on the ground floor, and the warmth from them rose up to the family living above. All warmth is used efficiently. Hot springs are not found everywhere in Iceland. The end walls of turf houses are often made of wood. The animals have their own entrance. Iceland is large, more than 2.5 times the size of Denmark. Even though they are a young nation, Icelanders are extremely conscious of their own history. Here is the historical site Skriðuklaustur in East Iceland. A monastery with a short life that spanned from 1493 to about 1540, when the Reformation came to Iceland. there are forests in some places in Iceland too. In 1949, Iceland and Norway began to collaborate on forestry. Many people from the Norwegian Forestry Society and Agder Forest Owners Association have traveled to Iceland over the years to participate in forest planting. Even though this effort has produced some results, the Icelanders have never had enough wood for building houses. This is one of the windows in the house of Egilsstaðir. The farm is located in eastern Iceland, a few miles from the town Egilsstaðir. Egilsstaðir is mentioned in tourist brochures, and I was puzzled when I reached the bar. But the road was open, so I drove on. I met a friendly lady from the Icelandic National Museum. The tourist brochures and I were too early. She told me that this turf house will be open for tourists and others in a few years. But she would be here for a couple of hours, so I was welcome to film and photograph. Here we can clearly see the two floors. Badstova, the living room on top, received heat rising from the animals in the barn below. There was no great prosperity on the Egilsstaðir farm. When the farming family moved away, they left the farm as it was. It was taken over by the National Museum in 1976. From a distance, it's difficult to spot turf houses. This could be an advantage if enemies came sailing along the coast during times of unrest. Those days are over now. Today the ships mostly bring tourists to Iceland. In Seydisfjörður in eastern Iceland, cruise ships arrive every day in the summer season, often twice a day. All this activity can be hectic, but tourism has become a significant source of income for Iceland. In Seydisfjörður, the old and new times meet. Within short distance from the cruise ships, the remains of an old farming settlement are being excavated. Here as well, there were turf houses. Archaeologists have found many artifacts used both for utility and decoration. Every Friday, interested people could hear archaeologists talk about their work. The area has been surveyed for remains in preparation for building an avalanche protection. Even though these turf houses will not be reconstructed, they can provide a lot of information. Near Reykjavik at Laugarvatn is another example of Iceland's unique building history, namely cave houses. The house you see here was built in 2017. It is an exact replica of the house where a family lived until 1922. The last Icelander born in a cave house was born here. In many places people had dug out caves in sandstone. The caves were often so large that there were room for both people and animals. The cave house at Laugarvatn is open every day, and the guide talks about both daily life and festivities. If you ask whether Icelanders are hardy and tough people, the answer must be yes.